Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Gamer Talk podcast. I got two guests today. One you have already heard, and a new one. Hey, Anthony, and hey, Ray.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Pretty good. It's been a while, Anthony. I think the last time we spoke was also Christmas time, if I remember correctly, and it was with Paula. And how has things changed, or how are things going at the moment, you guys?
Yeah, it's been a busy year in game dev. So as we all know, it's
Mm-hmm.
been a turbulent year for things happening around the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a lot of good games have come out. I've been playing Space Marine 2 quite a bit because that's great. I love Space Marine. So that's been my kind of relaxing thing to do during this year with friends, and some Dead Island 2, which was good. So on the
Oh yeah.
creative side, been doing some artwork on the side in between work projects. So I'm kind of slowly getting back into doing portfolio things just because I miss it. And when you end up spending most of your time in Excel sheets and conference
Oh yeah.
documents and Jiras
Mm.
and reviewing work, you just get excited to do the work yourself. So I'm making sure that during the holidays over the next week or two, I'll be in Blender and Unreal having some fun and
Oh,
playing a bit
fun.
of Indiana Jones as well, which is also fab. I've been playing a bit of that this week. So yeah, we can dig into more about the what is game dev in 2024 throughout the conversation here, but that's kind of mainly what I've been doing. Because the other thing, actually, I was 40 this year. Not that it matters much, but
Ooh.
because this has been a selfish year where I said I'm not going to do any crazy extra projects. I'm not going to put myself under pressure to do things that I used to do in the past, like the Grads for Games or helping with different initiatives to help people. So it's not that I don't want to help. I'll do it again next year. But I decided to
Mm.
have like a year out and take it a bit more slow. And I successfully have managed that, which is great. So that's why I've been
Amazing.
playing more games this year, reading more books, exercising more, and just taking stock of life rather than being stuck in the weeds a bit. But that's going to change in 2025 because, as Ray knows, with work projects and everything being busy, I think 2025 is going to be the opposite of that for me, where it's going to be head down and working on game art and trying to get stuff out the door.
Cool. Same for you, Ray. How have you experienced this year?
I mean, this year has been pretty good for me, which I feel a bit bad saying because I know it's been rough to say the least for the industry as a
Mm.
whole.
Mm.
I'm pretty lucky to be in the position that Ant and I both are in. Doing co-dev. As bad as it sounds, it's good for business. As teams get cut down or things get shifted around, people tend to look for more development partners. So it makes
Mm.
us feel
Be more
a
be
little
more
bit more
flexible.
secure. Yeah, yeah, and
Mm.
and like we can be flexible. It also means it's a bit more fun. I mean, I enjoy getting stuck in and getting involved and dealing with complicated things, and that is kind of the nature of codev a lot of the time. So 2024 for me personally has been pretty good. It's certainly been difficult, seeing a lot of friends struggling with work or seeing studios get shut down left, right, and center has been crazy. So I've kind of been on a similar trajectory to Anthony, just trying to make sure that I'm in the right headspace, going to the gym, working out, making sure I'm excited to do that art every day. And I think that helps
Mm.
keep spirits up. Um,
Yes, I mean
So,
turning off social media. That's what I've been doing
oh,
because
I
social media has just
oh.
gone insane.
I deleted my Twitter
Mhm.
account this year. That's
Wow.
why I'm so happy. That's what it is.
Do you know what? Yes, I'm not going to delete mine, but I definitely am on it way less. That's something I've
Yeah.
done over the last
Yeah.
couple of months where a few minutes a day, catch up, get some cool headlines, see some cool stuff being shared, and then I'm out. I just turn it all off and go focus on what's important to me.
Yeah, I feel like that sort
But
of operates on outrage, right? Like you scroll through the feed, and then it will notice that you've scrolled back to something because you're like, what? And then it just will feed
Mm.
you more of that. It just gets worse and worse. So
yeah,
I
Yeah.
axe the whole thing. I feel
because
bad
Doom
for it, but
scrolling.
one thing I'll mention as well is with the discussion as well, Ray, about codev being kind
mm,
of a safe space. Yes, it is, but there have been codev studios which have
of
also
course,
lost projects because clients lose projects, and
Mm.
it is not exactly super safe
it's not
either.
easy
And
for anyone.
obviously,
Yeah, of
no, I
course.
think there's no safe space in the industry at the moment. I think a lot of this comes down to obviously this theories around inflation, economies. There's discussion around sustainable business practices for games, which is like a bonus topic we have listed here.
Of course.
And
Mhm.
to quickly touch on that, for me and the observations I've made in the last 17 years, that games is in a weird spot where technology has never been better to get something done that looks awesome. But at the same time, it's also more costly to do so in some ways, and it's very easy to blow budgets and be unsustainable and go too far. So it's almost at a time where we have to be more, and I mean we as the royal we for game dev, we have to be more diligent, self-critical, and aware of choices and what we're trying to build and how we're trying to get it out and make it more sustainable that way. Because it is now easier just to make mistakes and blow budgets, and that ends up in this scenario where people then have to get let go and look for other jobs because budgets are not getting tackled well in some ways. So there's a topic to jump on.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it's easier to get things wrong, for lack of a better term, right? When you start cutting costs or start asking developers, the only solution is then to find outsource partners, because you've run out of developers to make your projects. You need to find outsource partners, and that can potentially get expensive very quickly, especially when you start bringing on multiple partners just to cover bases that you kind of probably should have had covered internally. That stuff does happen, and the industry's at a point where it becomes very easy because there are so many outsourced studios now. We have marketplaces full of assets to blow your budget on.
Oh yeah,
It works.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I was going to touch on as well. Is we had this discussion this week at the office, not related to any client projects, but just in general, and it might be something worth kind of digging into a little bit because a lot of this comes from the actual perceived kind of benchmark or quality you're going to go for in a game or assets. And I think a lot of people, especially game developers, when you're kind of in the midst of developing a game and you have to design like the IP and the styles, and there's so many things happening that when it comes to benchmarking what the 3D prop would be, there seems to be kind of people reaching too far, or some projects aiming like super high to have like the best quality imaginable, which works on a small subset of benchmark assets. But then if you have to scale that, outsource it, or do hundreds of assets to that level, you realize it does not scale with the budget, team size, or time you have. And therein lies pressures then that happen. So I think that's where even from something as simple as, hey, your prop benchmark can really help bring costs down, because you can early on set out, okay, this is how much time we spent on stuff. Does that fit in time and budget and the team size we have? And is it the right kind of visual fidelity and look that we want for what the publisher, whoever's going to be happy with it? And I see a lot of this kind of experience for me seems to be lost in the industry, or just isn't in every company. And people are not asking those kind of questions. So instead, it's almost like I'm going to go out there and not name and shame people, but in a group, like that whole ArtStation post of, oh, I did this great prop, spent 6 months on it with 8K maps, and it's amazing. Like it is, and the artistry there is fantastic. And yes, you did, and it is fantastic. It's great, but can you do that at scale? No.
Can you do it in 3
Can a team,
days?
yeah, and can a team of 200 people do that? No.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem though, is learning to develop for the game you're making, right? Like if you're working on something like Doom, you can't. A player's not going to stop to look at your nuts and bolts, right? No one's stopping to smell the rivets
I do
on anything, and
but that's just
you and
me.
I do, right?
That's your
But
job,
say,
maybe.
you
Yeah,
have to
but
develop
I
for
do.
that, right?
I've recently stopped in Black Ops 6 to look at the rivets and bolts, and I did the same with Indie. So just saying, I've done that, and it is good.
As a general rule of thumb, I think there's a tendency to just go for, hey, let's do everything perfectly, 100%, no cut corners, no hidden geometry, and that just doesn't. It's not practical on a large scale a lot of the time. Depending on the project, of course. If you're making a flight simulator, then yes, you want your airplane to be 1-to-1. You want the rivets in the right place. But I don't think a player, playing something like Quake going at 100 miles an hour is going to care too much about a tiny individual asset. It's very easy to get caught up in those details, especially when you have access to large outsourcing teams, and you can just pay to get a lot of that stuff in. That's another easy way to blow a budget.
And then you throw in like nanite or engines that can support a higher geometry count. And it all seems feasible at a point, but there always has to be that reality check some point during the production to see, is this really sustainable and tenable for what we have to deliver? And I think, yeah, a lot of that's been missing basically, and you can kind of see it when you play games today. Some of them, again, I'm going to pick out Space Marine 2 and the team there for Focus Entertainment and stuff. That to me, yes, they had a couple of delays. I've no idea how that production went or any of the reasons behind it, but that is a very tight game. You play it and there's very little wrong. It's visually consistent. Everything's made to a good quality, but nothing is kind of overstepping that mark that I've seen. Everything is just done extremely well. So I think Saber and the team did a really good job with that one in terms of making those kind of calls and cuts to get a very polished experience.
Also a topic I want to speak with you guys about, because like if you take a look at modern games and we have this like super crazy graphics, like Horizon, like the Last of Us remastered, like these super realistic high end visuals. Um, but the games like 15 years ago, they didn't have this graphics, but they were still fun and they were still bought and they were still like they made something with us and they touched us in a way. So how you guys think where this is like going from an art perspective, like how far can we go, like, and even if we scratch the baseline to photorealism, how better is the game gonna be? Like that's something I really wanted to speak with you guys about.
I have a bit of a hot take here, maybe. This
Mm-hmm.
might make some people frown. I am an environment artist, which makes this worse. But I think that the visuals of a video game are probably one of the least important aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gameplay comes first. Audio is way more important than art is because audio helps you understand how something feels. If I give you a cube as a gun and it sounds good and it animates well, that matters a lot more than what the gun looks like and how big the texture is or whatever, right? So as bad as it sounds to say, graphics tend to not be very important depending on what you're making. If your goal is
Mm-hmm.
to immerse someone or tell a story, something like The Last of Us is very focused on being a cinematic movie-like experience.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say anything negative about the gameplay of those games, but I think with worse visuals, they wouldn't be regarded as well because they focus a lot on things like character performance and environmental storytelling. So I hate to give the generic game dev "it depends" answer, um,
Absolutely,
but
yeah. Yeah.
I hope that we are starting to reach the point where a lot of games graphically are starting to look quite similar because we're able to hit these, insane quality benchmarks a little bit easier these days. We have things like photo scanning for assets. I think we'll get to the point where we'll start seeing art styles branch out a little bit more, people try more to distinguish their game visually. If you look at what Arcane do, for example, their games all have very distinct visual styling. I think
Mm.
that helps a lot. You can look at a game and instantly be like, oh, it's this. If you show me a brick wall, a realistic brick wall, chances are I don't really know what game it came from. You show me a brick wall from Dishonored, I know what game it's from, right?
Mm.
So I,
Mm-hmm.
I kind
Mm-hmm.
of part of me hopes we'll start moving in that direction where we care a lot more about artistic style than realism, or nuts and bolts and things like that. And I hope we're getting closer to that point because I'm not a huge fan of realistic styles, even if I find them incredibly fun to produce. I think they're less fun to look at, and we're running into the problem now. We're getting really high resolution textures. We're using a lot of upscaling. We're running into noise problems, like across the board. Games are getting
Mm.
super noisy in motion,
Yeah.
and that's a
Yeah.
huge concern.
Like, yeah, overflow with yeah. If you take a look at Suicide Squad, for example, like the VFX is, I get brain damage when I take a look at it, because it's way too much happening on the screen, and my 30-year-old brain cannot compensate with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
Anthony, what is
that's
your take?
Yeah, I don't think it's a hot take at all from Ray because I'm in exactly the same boat. That for me, totally respect the craft of the likes of Naughty Dog with The Last of Us and things because they have such a high bar, and it's super
Mm-hmm.
impressive to see when it's done well.
Mhm.
But also, you have to remember these are hundreds of millions of dollar budgets. So not every game's going to be like that. Like even the Suicide
Mm-hmm.
Squad, the animation and character work that was fantastic. I finished that game this year as well. That was quite a good one.
Mm-hmm.
The overall tone of it was quite amusing. But in terms of art, I think it's diminishing returns that once you kind of hit that peak of being able to recreate realism like that, I agree with Ray, then that gets a bit dull. It's not exciting anymore. And if it's a cinematic experience that is set in the real world and you need it for creative reasons, I'm all for it. And that's kind of where my view comes down on this, that I don't think games themselves are doing enough to really find art styles that suit the project and what they're trying to do. They're all following trends like the Overwatch style, the Warcraft style, hyper realism, realism. It's actually a very small gamut you're seeing most of the time. But there are a few, like Dishonored, who broke the mold and did
Mm-hmm.
something different. But from an art direction point of view and having done a little bit of this work in the past, setting up your own style and your own aesthetic is so much work in the front
Yeah,
end, and then to train teams to do it, I think that's part of the reason why studios run away from it. And while you have these kind of genre aligned styles where you hire a stylized artist, but actually what is a stylized art style? It's something that's not realistic, but within that range of stylized, it could be a billion things. And I don't think
Mm.
if you look at comic art, you look at animation, you look at illustration and graphic design, and look at even fine art or paintings, whatever, the gamut and range of styles in all of those mediums way outweigh in terms of number and variety video games. And that's one of my big gripes. I think video games have gotten a bit boring
Hmm.
with styles. It's
Yeah.
too safe, too simple. I get why to do it because there's a commercial reality and it's the whole training up. Like Arcane again is a good example. Like the TV show on Netflix has just blown the doors off what people expect and what style
Mm.
can be, and that is an amazingly well made show. But that took years to get off the ground and a lot of
Yeah.
effort from the teams to be able to do it that well, that consistently. So to me, that's just a masterclass, and I would absolutely love to play that game. I know
Yeah.
obviously I know there is a game, but that's
Yeah.
different.
I
But
think it also
Yeah.
makes outsourcing a lot harder, right? You mentioned like
yes,
training people up internally, but outsourcing is a nightmare. If
Hmm.
my game is realistic and I need like 70 tractors, I can just go find a company that'll make me 70 tractors. But if it's in a Dishonored art style, that becomes a lot more difficult.
I think that's where you need to have all the documentation and the hows and the benchmarks done internally. And that's another thing, again, when touching the sustainability stuff again, that if anyone who's in any position to affect this stuff at the studio is listening, if you're going to outsource a lot of work, do not do it until you've done your benchmarks, you've done all the write-ups, you've done everything you need to convey, as Ray said, all the stuff to the outsourced team or co-devs or whoever, sister studios, whoever's helping you, to make sure that it's all clean and locked down. Because if you do it before that point, it'll inevitably have to get reworked or done again, or you're just going to burn loads of money for no reason.
Mm.
So to do something like that, like if I was given a project today to do with, say, like the Arcane art style, I'll come up with a brand new art style. There you go. What a crazy idea. If I was given a
Mhm.
project today to do it, I'd want a team of artists, about 6 or 7, a mix of concept and 3D and texture. And I'd want a year of just that small team working alongside design, narrative, or whoever to figure out the tone, the world, the market placement, the genre, everything of what this needs to be. And you put a lot of effort in up front to figure that out and prove it all out before you even bother touching production and going wide. And I think that's
Mm.
what scares. And like, actually, one thing we should call out is like the classic story going around like Borderlands when they had a different style right up until the end, and then they just flipped it at the last, I guess, few weeks or months, and they just completely changed the game, and now everyone loves it. It's a very unique,
Yeah.
standout thing, and that's actually the opposite of this, where instead of spending ages getting all prepped and ready, they just made some very brave decisions at the last minute, which is actually then given the IP more legs and more success. And I'd imagine that was a lot of reasons why it stuck and appealed to people, would have been the style.
Yeah. The topic came up because I replayed Arkham Asylum. I started replaying it like a few weeks ago because I played it when I was younger. And I thought to myself, crazy! The game is for my age is super old, and I played it on a PlayStation 3, and it still sells me the idea of like the vibe, the asylum, the everything, but the graphics are like super outdated in terms of like texture size, repeatability, animation is a bit, yeah, it's quite old, but it still sells me the idea, and I still have so much fun playing it
See, that'd
without
be
these high end graphics. That's what I.
you're totally right, because I've played Arkham Knight, I think it was last year, because I'd only just finished
Mm-hmm.
it last year ahead of Suicide Squad coming out. And Arkham Knight had the same vibe for me, that even though it was a few years old, it held up extremely well. And that is
Mm.
down to two things. One is extremely strong art direction, and this is where sometimes art direction and art style get conflated. They can be different, they can be part of a whole, and also its consistency. And that's one thing that I mentioned, like with Space Marine 2, that getting consistency across all your assets in terms of visual style, textile density, technical fidelity, all these things. If you get everything consistent, it will last longer in terms of appeal, and it doesn't show the age as much. So I think if you really want to hit that kind of note with a game to have it more timeless, that's why those kind of styles that are not as realistic tend to age less bad. But if they're done to a high level, consistent, and with good art direction, you get the Arkham Knight, you get the Arkham Asylum. It's exactly what happens
Yeah.
Mm.
if
Consistency
you
is a
pull that
good
off.
way of putting that. I think
It is
consistency makes a
consistency.
huge difference. Like texel density is the easiest thing to notice in that realm, I think. You know,
Yeah.
I think I said to you before, Anthony, like if I think low resolution textures do not look bad. What looks bad is low resolution textures next to high resolution textures, because
Yes.
then you notice.
Mm.
Otherwise, you have, I
Hmm.
mean, if you
If it's
launch Minecraft,
consistently low, it's a
yeah,
style.
if you launch Minecraft right now, you
Hmm.
don't go like, oh, this has got bad graphics. You go like, oh, it looks a bit weird, and then after 5-10 minutes, you're used to it, and now it can't look any other way, right?
True.
I'm
So
throwing shade at Nintendo or the Switch here, but like I'm playing Metroid Prime and you play Mario or something like Luigi's Mansion,
mhm,
they all have low memory limits because like 4 gig, whatever it is
yeah,
in the Switch,
it's tiny.
but they all look fantastic because they're consistent and they're well art directed.
Mhm.
And as you
Mm.
said, they're not necessarily high res, but they're extremely well made. And therein lies the issue for me. That's why every project I'm on, it's consistency and strong art direction will outweigh every time. As we mentioned earlier, like visual fidelity, you're going for the most high res, most realistic graphics. That kind of doesn't matter, and that'll fall. You can have the most high realistic face texture scan
Mm.
on a character, but if the art direction's bad, i.e., lighting, materials, design, all that kind of stuff, along with kind of inconsistent textile densities or things, then it would look bad either way. So
Yeah.
one part of it is what is that bar, but then getting it consistent, then applying the art
But that
direction on
also,
top.
so to me, that circles back around to artistry, because one game I replayed this year, like a month ago now, was Half-Life 2. And Half-Life 2 famously has really good facial animations. And they're all very exaggerated, they're all very over the top, but they look incredible. It's been what, 20 years? And they look amazing, because a lot of modern games will just auto-generate lip movements to line up with the voice lines, and that's kind of it. So you have someone kind of sitting there very straight faced, only their mouth is moving. Maybe they'll raise an eyebrow every now and then, but that's it.
Mm.
And then you go 20 years back to a game with, let's just say worse graphics, right? Worse technology, worse animation, all of that, and it looks significantly better because they thought like, oh, how specifically do we express this scene to players? What face is pulled here, rather than like, hey, the graphics are good, the dialogue is good, let's mush these things together, right? And I don't
Yeah.
know how much of that can be called artistry. I don't know how much of that is time. And obviously, Valve wanted to do something very specific and they wanted to chase that technology. And a lot of games are not interested in doing that kind of thing. A lot of games have so much dialogue. I don't know how practical that would be. But then you look at something like Baldur's Gate 3, which is the same thing. They know they have a lot of dialogue. You're looking at people talking a lot, so it's fully mocapped and it looks amazing. And
Mm.
that is a budgetary constraint, but again, it's consistency, it's artistry, and it's making sure everything fits together. Because I find a lot of
Yes.
the auto-generated mouth movements in modern dialogue, just it doesn't really fit. It doesn't look right. It pulls you out. The Horizon Zero Dawn remaster reanimated all of the dialogues. I think before it was very stiff, and in the remaster it looks wonderful. I think it's all mocap now.
Yeah, it's kind of sad when you take a look at like Mass Effect Andromeda, for example, where the animation is super bad done with the budget and with the latest tech compared to really, really old games where they just relied on the tech they had and they did it just well and it works even
Yeah.
better than modern games.
No, that's it. I don't think money is the answer to all of it. Like this
Hmm.
is why I think,
Yeah.
for me personally, and I got limited knowledge, so just take that with a grain of salt. That I think game budgets at the moment are way too big, or at least not used effectively. And that kind of goes back to the
Hmm.
artistry craft kind of
Why
thing.
is that?
I'd say it's going to be a really it depends answer, but I think it's either going to be teams don't have the experience there because that's the reality as well, that as all these games are getting made and each the teams now, like when I started in the industry, you can get a full game made in all disciplines with about what 100 people ish
Mhm.
or less. And as you know, now with your studio size, you're approaching that. But most projects in the last few years I've been on are like 300 plus, if not more
Hmm.
people. So there seems to be more devs needed. Therefore, there's a shortage for every studio to have the right expertise. So it's either going to be that, like knowledge and skill drain, or it's time. They don't have enough time to invest in the tools due to other pressures of the project or things not coalescing as they'd wish, or it's going to be a mix of everything. So I think it depends per project. But for me, it'll be yeah, just
So they're burning money kind of way, right? Like
I'd imagine there's some sort of element of money getting burned,
hmm.
chasing, get the right thing, but maybe not chasing it efficiently or
Hmm.
effectively.
Hmm.
And it's easy for me to say here with no context.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's
true.
I think every studio has their own reasons as to why. Maybe they're chasing something which is a high bar. Maybe their team is just junior, they haven't dealt with it before, and that's fine too, because that's how you learn. That's how they get this knowledge. But as you all mentioned, games have had this stuff for years. there is and are certain approaches to things that are accepted, or at least a good baseline, people should be more aware of that and chasing that baseline first and then one-upping it and plussing it, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every time, which I've seen many studios do, where it's like, even though Unreal has a lot of stuff out of the box, people either ignore it or use a little bit, but then don't use anything else and try and do it from scratch. And they just need to be more sensible.
I also wonder how much of that budgetary problem is a self-perpetuating cycle. If you have a team of 100 people, they can be directed by a single art director and a single associate art director, and they can actually review those assets. If you balloon that up to 300 people, suddenly that one art director is just not enough.
Nope.
It's going to take more time to have more people, and your pipeline ends up being slower in the long run than it would with less people, right? So then you need an additional art director, which is a lot of money. Usually, art directors are worth every cent. So you need another art director. But then you have two art directors, so that's kind of a problem in and of itself.
Well,
Because now you
I
have
was
two
going to
people
say, like, a
pulling
lot of
heads, right?
projects need that, though. If you look
And
at
they
the
do.
credits from most
Yeah.
recent games, you have like a vehicle art director, character art
Yes.
director,
environment art
That's
prop art
director.
director,
ballooned,
environment art
right?
director. Like,
Very
so
quickly.
this is already happening, right?
Yeah.
For exactly the reason you've mentioned. Before, you'd have one, like in projects that I started on, there was one art director and that was it. And they didn't necessarily review all the assets. That was left to the leads.
Sure.
They'd be more high level overall experience, visuals and vibe of the game, and that was it. They didn't really spend much time with the technical side or implementation.
So what needs to happen then? Like what? How do need to video game companies restructure or reorganize themselves to get back get back on track again and not burn money, as we said?
Yeah, I definitely have two
It's
different sides to this. One
it's
would
hard.
be
Yeah.
companies need to go back to more of a gated milestone approach. That
Mm-hmm.
let's just go hypothetical for a
Oh yeah.
second. We're going to be building a new IP. We have an idea for a game genre. We'd say just FPS for fun. There's going to be some special cool mechanic for it, and we're going to spend what 10, 15 million to at least invest the initial run. I would invest that money, go as far as a prototype, prove out that game mechanic, prove out that it's worthwhile and would fit in the marketplace, and do all that work up front. And if you can't prove it within that 10, 15 million, you just stop, you walk away, you let that money go. Because I've seen too many studios throw 15, 20, 30 million at something, then throw another 15, 20, 30 million at something, and they just keep throwing the money in the pot, and it never actually improves the overall experience.
Mm-hmm.
And you do get to this critical mass point
So
where
get lost
people,
in it.
yeah, people don't want to say it's not good anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
that, again, I know there's more to it than that, but companies themselves, like publishers, wherever, need to be looking at the stages of the game and be a lot more honest about it. Like, it's either green light or red light, depending on where stuff is, how stuff's progressing. So that's more from a business standpoint, in terms of, I think companies should get more self-critical. The other side of it, and this is where it gets a bit crazier, is I think with the industry the way it is, and we're going to end up discussing AI in a minute because of this, we need to have a look at production practices, how long we're spending. This goes back to the benchmark thing I mentioned, that if projects are costing more to do, it means we need more people or more efficient working practices. We then need to be bringing in more associate or junior devs to skill them up and train them up and give them the knowledge. And companies don't invest in that. And I think this is where all this is a self-propagating problem, where companies are too busy chasing their crazy deadlines and their crazy budgets, not knowing what they really want and wasting money, for the want of a better word, and not actually taking a step back, really looking at stuff qualitatively and giving the team time to get familiar with tools, get familiar with process, and listen to the team if they're saying, oh, this takes too long to make, I need some tech art support to help streamline this. They don't invest that time and money in smart areas to make it better overall. And it's likewise, they don't invest in new graduates or team members to come in, train them up to help with the bandwidth issue. As Ray mentioned, a lot of it might go to outsource or code ever elsewhere. So I think the industry as a whole needs to bring in fresh blood, train it up properly, find better ways of training it up and nurturing talent, while at the same time taking all the people who are seniors and leads at the moment within the industry. Because again, I don't know what your experience is, Christoph, but what you've had over the years. But basically, I've seen a lot of people be promoted too soon into senior and
Mm-hmm.
lead
Oh yeah.
roles and even
Yeah,
director
yeah,
roles,
Yeah.
when it can bring an entire project down, basically.
yeah, yeah.
And
They're
projects
overwhelmed
can,
with
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
projects can get derailed by months if you put the wrong person in the wrong place. So I think we not only do you have to bring in fresh talent and train that up to help really start bolstering the industry, you also need to take the talent you do have and really deal with that properly and look at their trajectory, their knowledge, their experience, and either get them under the wing of someone to train them up to the next level, or invest time in them to get external training or whatever it might be to make them effective leads, directors, or whatever else. Because a lot of my training and learning for the last 17 years has just been boots on the ground, fighting fires, and just in the middle of everything. And that's not been the best way to learn. I found it useful. I've survived this far, but I would not say no to more formal training, learning from peers, learning from others, to not make these same mistakes. Because whenever I walk onto a project now as a co-dev, you can immediately spot a whole bunch of things that can be improved immediately on a project just because people did not know. I should have done this, should have done that. They just didn't have the experience of it. And that's not their fault. They didn't know. No
See
one
that? I
above them
think
knew. No one could tell them. So, yeah, I think there's definitely something that could be done there as well to
so.
help.
See, that's interesting because that I think is also, funnily enough, a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle, right? The I don't want to call it brain drain, but I'm not sure what other term to use, right? Where you have a lot of seniors, leads, directors leaving the industry because they are overworked or they've been rushed into positions that they're not ready for. They're completely overwhelmed and they burn out incredibly fast and then they disappear. And
And they
then
don't learn anything,
and they don't learn
or
anything,
they
right?
don't impart anything
Exactly.
because they're gone. So that's how I think we're losing it, is we're not
Exactly.
keeping those people long enough
Mhm.
to impart that knowledge to the next wave coming in.
And then, because they're all gone, the people below them that haven't had enough time to learn get pushed into those positions and they don't know enough to necessarily take them. They burn out really quickly and then they're gone and the cycle just repeats, right? And I think I, I wish there was some data on this. I'd love to know what the average experience level for kind of each role is in this industry compared to 10 years ago. My feelings tell me that there are less experienced seniors now. Obviously, it depends on studio, right? Some studios won't call someone a senior unless they have like 10 years of experience. Um, but yeah, I'd be very interested to know the numbers behind that. But I do feel that problem of people being pushed up really quickly before they're ready is just a self-perpetuating cycle because then they'll also teach the wrong lessons to the people that are trying to learn from them, and that's
And
very
they're
dangerous.
and they're naturally battlefield promotions that I guess we've
Yes,
all experienced on
of
projects.
course.
Obviously, me and Ray work together now, but there's a time we didn't. And like with Christoph, you'd worked where you are now and obviously previous places before. And I think we've all seen people be promoted because, oh, this lead or director, someone's just left. We need someone to fill the
Yeah,
gap.
there's nothing you can do
Who's in
about
the
that.
room?
Yeah,
Someone just needs to step up and do it. And that's how I've ended up in that's how I've ended up in a lead position as well. But for me, when I took my first lead position, I did it after I was senior for, I can't count, oh God, I think it was about 5, 6, 7 years as a senior. I was almost close to a decade in. I felt like I knew enough that when that time came for me to go, okay, I want to be a lead, I was pretty sure I could do it. But no one was telling me I was sure. It was just kind of here's a job, be a lead. And then when you get there, you realize there's a bunch of stuff I didn't know when you learn all that then, and you just have to be aware and open to be wrong and to pick things up. But now, like one thing we do now at D3T is we've added in a associate lead role, and part of the reasoning for it is when someone starts to become a lead and enter that part of the training, they get external training to actually be a leader of people and a manager, and that kicks
Yes.
in first of all.
That's really good.
But then there's the second part of it where I get involved to start training them up to understand that they get everything about the game holistically. They understand art's impact on design, art's impact on engineering, art's impact on the final quality, what their responsibilities are, how they should be reviewing, what they should be reviewing. There's a whole thing that kicks in now to kind of support them to grow them from senior to associate lead to lead rather than going straight from senior to, oh, now I'm a lead,
Yeah.
and
I
and
think
then you just sink or swim. We now have started to put things in place that people really become a lead, and you get the training and the investment in you to be good for that. And everyone's different as well, right? Every person's going to have strengths and weaknesses, and we work with each lead on their own terms. We don't assume someone's perfect at everything. We work with them, and they get a little bit of responsibility on a project, see how that goes. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't, and you kind of deal with that over a year or two until they're fully ready to lead properly.
that
That's our
leadership
personal goal of
training
it.
makes a huge difference as well. I think people tend to forget that a lead is kind of a managerial role. It's not
Oh, it is.
necessarily it's not necessarily an art role. And I think a lot of
Nope.
times it's like, oh, your art is amazing. That's real sick. We'll promote you up to lead because you're
Yeah.
so good at making art. And it's like,
Not every
okay,
good
but now you're
artist is a
managing
good
people
lead.
and you have
Yeah.
no soft skills.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
that's
you
why we
have
have the
no
principal
manager
role. That's what
experience.
that role
Exactly.
exists for. If you're
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
if you're a master of your craft and you just want to make art, you're a principal. The end.
Yes.
That's the
That's it. That's your
principle.
Yeah,
path.
that's where the wizards go, and that's cool. And you don't want to end up in that scenario where, yeah, you have leads that have just come up with like no training. You never. I mean, I'm sure we've all worked at places like that as well, right? Where it's very clear that this lead's an incredible artist, but like I don't know if they should have been put in a managerial role.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the other thing I mentioned as well, was just stuck with all this,
Mhm.
is actually a lot of devs now have never actually shipped a full game from
Oh
beginning to end.
God, yeah. I mean, production
That's
Ooh.
what I'll
takes
throw out there
6 years,
because
right?
yeah, and I think that's why.
Mm-hmm.
Because these and this is why I think it's becoming
The project is
unsustainable,
so
because
long.
the timelines have grown. The longest I've ever worked
Mm.
on was actually Drive Club. You can see the picture behind me. But Drive Club for me was like 4 or 5 years, if I remember. I think
Huh.
it's thereabouts. That was
Mm.
the longest project I'd been on. Everything before that was about 18 months. So it's way quicker, faster turnaround, much
Mm.
crazier.
I mean,
And
I
that
know someone that worked on Star Citizen, and he joined that as an intern. I want to say, like in like 2013 or wherever it was, he joined as an intern, and he's left the studio as a senior. They still haven't shipped though, and it's like again,
that's a
amazing
whole
artist,
different
but like,
topic.
and that is a
Um,
whole different topic, sure. But
yeah.
like that, I feel like shipping a game that last 10% is always hell.
Nah, that's a business model, is my point of view. That game knows what it's doing. That's a whole different topic, that one.
Yeah, in
But no,
terms
I
of
do
ship
agree though that
titles
yeah,
though, it makes a big difference. I
yeah.
think.
But because people haven't experienced that, people don't get the difference between like pre-production, all the work that has to get done
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
getting
yeah.
Mhm.
yourself prepped
The
for
whole
production,
pipeline.
getting through
Mm.
production then and being able to close out a project is a skill in of itself. That for you to be able to say no, to know when to say, okay, we're stopping now, tools down, we're then going to polish up these aspects to make the best game possible. That window when you close out a project is crucial for the game becoming a 7, 8, or a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
That is your window to really make it work. Because as we all know, games don't really
Mm-hmm.
coalesce into the final form until the last few months.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
if you mishandle that closeout, you could do more damage than good. And I think that's one thing I think I'd add into this conversation as well, is when it comes to discussing experience and sustainability and efficiency of projects getting done and decisions getting made. I think a lot of that experience comes from people who have shipped multiple games end to end, but that's becoming fewer and fewer because of the timelines.
Yeah. So let's circle back to a bit. So how would you say that the consumer, like the player for who we are making the games, like how would you say their expectations are changing in a way, or how has it evolved in the past few years? Yeah, I felt like the whole community became a bit more toxic
Mhm.
and a bit more harsh and critical. Yeah. So how's your take on that?
That's quite a difficult question to answer, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
I personally, I mean, I'm quite young. I'm only 28, but I've been playing video games as far as my memory goes back. I mean, there is famously, I have it in this house somewhere, but my mum took a picture of me playing Doom when I was 3 years old, sitting on my brother's lap. You know,
That's
hands like
cool.
both hands on the keyboard. I've been playing games my entire life. It has always been the thing that I do, and I'm very emotionally invested in this industry. Sometimes to an unhealthy extent, but that's a conversation for another day, right? So, like, I think I've managed to remain a consumer. There's a lot of people in this industry that don't play games, and that's fine. You know, sometimes that people don't enjoy that to relax. So, I think I've managed to remain a consumer, and I do think the space has gotten more toxic, right? Like, I remember 15 years ago, a new video game was an exciting thing. It's like, oh, someone has done a thing. Like, that's rad. That's awesome. What have they
Mm-hmm.
done differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the industry is so big now, and the fan base, you know, the amount of players is an incomprehensible number that I think it's not really
Yeah.
possible to put people in a box of like positivity or negativity, right? Because I think I see both. I see people that respond to games too positively, in my opinion, and that more critique is needed, but critique is the key word there. And I think some communities are very negative, right? And they just want to hate everything. Oh, new game come out, new game bad. I've noticed this a
Mm-hmm.
lot
Mm-hmm.
with the release of Stalker 2. Like, I'm a huge fan of the original three games. I've really enjoyed 2 so far, despite its problems. But there is definitely a subset of those people that are fans of the original. They want to gatekeep that original thing. And a certain level of gatekeeping can be healthy to maintain the core structure of what a thing is. But I have noticed, a subset of people that want to gatekeep what that is. They want to gatekeep Stalkers. They want to make sure it doesn't get too many new fans, right? And that's kind of strange to me. That's very odd. I think consumer expectations have shifted in unpredictable ways. I think they'll continue to shift in unpredictable ways. You'll see a huge subset of people that say, you know what, I do want shorter games with worse graphics that take less time to produce. And then a game will come out that is that, and everyone will complain about the graphics and say that it looks bad. Oh, this looks like a game from 2015. I think it's almost impossible to predict, and I think that's kind of a nightmare for marketing teams. It's kind of a nightmare for developers. I think the only thing you can really do is make a game that you want to play and hope that it resonates with people. And that doesn't work when you're making a multi-million-dollar project. You can't just say like, we in the studio think it's cool, because we've also seen that play out. I don't want to name names, but we have seen it played out where everyone internally is like, oh, we thought this is great. We thought the writing was spot on, we thought the gameplay was spot on, and consumers are just not interested. So I think it's almost impossible to predict, really.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things at play there at once. Because one, for me, you're right, the toxicity side of it is one reason why I've just turned off social media, because it's just gotten crazy. I mean, people are entitled to their opinions, 100%. Say what you want, go for it. I've long divorced my expectations when a game comes out that I've worked on and people's opinions. Like, you like it, I'm really happy for you, and I want you to like it because we put everything into it. I think that's one thing to lead with here is when people make games and game developers make a game, you're trying to make the best game possible. We all try every day to make the best game possible. No one's trying to make a bad game. Yes, things go wrong, budgets get tightened, people are never aware of this. The end user, the player, and nor do we expect them to be aware of this, but they tend to not understand the full picture, and they can only perceive what's in their hand, which is why when I work on something and develop something with a team, it's always looking at it from that end player point of view. Like, if I bought this as a consumer, would I be happy with this? And is this of the quality I'd be happy to receive for this money? If so, you're doing well. And we should all be considering that more. But the other toxicity side of it is the player behaviors. And this is where I've a bit of a different insight, because like my son is 10, he only plays Fortnite, FIFA. He cares nothing for no other game. And that's interesting to me, especially as a game developer, because we're all building these experiences that we want to make or we feel the audience wants. And that's kind of what Ray mentioned, that then it hits and it doesn't land, and you're like, well, why don't kids like it? But it's a different generation. They don't care. And the like Fortnite's fantastic, where it has just so many user generated things now, and game modes and sub games and all the rest of it. It's just a really complex beast of stuff
Yeah.
that keeps kids entertained for ages. So I think a lot of the vocal side of it, the toxicity, I would like to see analytics to see, is that the newer, younger generation? Is it the
Oh yeah.
group of, is it people 30 plus? That's what would be interesting to find out. And the other issue with the toxicity stuff is, as we've seen anyway, well, without going into any details whatsoever, so much of it is loaded with politics or what's going on in different countries, or what's going on in different things, that my view of it is just shut up and play the games. Just have fun. If you don't like something, fine, move on, play something else. Like, you're absolutely entitled to not like it. You're entitled to trade it in and do what you want with it and play something else. But just find something you love and be happy, and don't waste time being bitter and angry over something that didn't meet whatever expectations you had.
I think
And
one
I'll bet
point,
you,
it's also important for developers to make a distinction between reaction and critique, right? Like,
yeah,
again, if you launch Minecraft, you say, oh no, the graphics are bad. That's a reaction. That's the kind of stuff people post on like Twitter or Reddit. Critique is separate from that. And I think those reactions, for the most part, can be ignored a lot of the time because they are just knee jerk and not incredibly helpful. But when people take the time to dig into the what and the why, like, why does the game look this way? Oh, because it is actually much easier to play because it looks this way. That can make a big difference. I remember reactions to Doom Eternal, for example, people saying it looked really cartoony and all the bright colors. And a lot of that has been washed away, right, with time, as people realize, like, oh, there's very good reason for this. It looks like that for a reason. These bright, saturated colors are to help keep the player informed at high speeds. So I think there's that, as well as is learning to separate that out, because I think reaction is often very toxic. People don't like change, and they don't like things being different. It feels worse with sequels, because they just want the first thing, but again, and then developers will change things, and the reactions are usually quite vitriolic. So yeah, learning to separate critique and reaction is really important as well.
But yeah, that usually means people liked it though, right? Because if you get a passionate group who really love the first iteration of a game or second, and then they're going against new stuff, which that's where you're caught as a publisher and developer. That do you keep refining that experience and give them more the same, but just a bit better and different? Or do you try and reinvent the wheel? And one easy example here, like the RPG elements of Assassin's Creed. I think that was a really good addition. I quite enjoyed that. It
Oh
kind of
yeah.
brought something else to it that I didn't think I wanted, but then as soon as it happened and you tried it in Origins and stuff, you're like, yeah, actually, yeah, this is good. I like it. Like this is good for me.
Mm.
But then
But for
that
me,
brings the question, Anthony, do people know what they want? Because like I've also
no.
had this where I'm surprised by mechanics.
Oh
I thought I
yeah,
didn't want.
this
I'm
is a
like,
good
actually,
idea.
I love this. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Yeah.
breaking those expectations is good.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
well, just think about the hits this year. Like if you have like Helldivers 2, for example, that hit and came out of nowhere,
Yep.
seemingly for some
Yeah.
people. And even
Nobody.
though there was an original game, no one
Yeah.
expected that one to drop and be like, it's amazing.
Nobody had
People
it
had
on the radar. Mm-hmm.
exactly, and as soon as it came out, I grabbed it day one for fun. I
So
was like, oh,
many
this seems
people
fun.
tried it out. Mm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I actually found that to be one of the positives of this year. Kind of came out of nowhere, had a really good vibe, did really well, was really fun to play. And I just want to see more of that. And that's what I was going to follow up with in a second. Is me as a gamer, I want to see games that maybe have smaller budgets, less importance on visual fidelity per se, unless there's good reason for it, and just more focus on fun gameplay, innovative ideas, new mechanics, new stuff. Because that's one thing I think is lacking in games now. And this is where I'll touch on AI briefly, and we can dig into it later as well. That I think AI is here to stay. It ain't going anywhere. Because we're artists, we always get into the discussion of AI around what it means for art and visuals and jobs. Totally discussion to be had there. But I think AI could also be leveraged to improve gameplay experiences, on the fly difficulty changes, making the game react to you in cooler ways. I think AI could do a lot to mix up the games and make them more fun and pleasurable experiences, like learning from players, learning from you and how you play and react
Mm-hmm.
to you. There's other areas of AI I think it could actually be quite beneficial to games. And of course, the sustainability side, if it can help in a way speed up any part of the production process that doesn't involve either being morally bankrupt, stealing from artists, and or taking jobs out. As you mentioned earlier, there's a bit of a resource problem with games and getting stuff done at scale. So if it can fix that, I'm all for it, but it needs to be handled very carefully. But outside of art, I think there's a massive potential there to do cool new things that AI.
Yeah.
So
See, I have a
now you said it.
I said it.
I,
It's there now.
said
yeah,
it.
because this is on our topics list as well, and I wanted to speak with you. But Ray, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I think from a consumer point of view, my opinion has always been that I'm deeply concerned with what the developer's intent is, right? Like it goes back to like difficulty screens. You launch a game for the first time, you go to difficulty selection, you see easy, medium, hard. I don't know what that means. Like what did you design the game to be played on? What is your intended experience? And some games do this. I think the easiest one that springs to mind is Halo. Heroic difficulty, I think literally says like this is the intended way to play. And that's cool because that means canonically we know how powerful everything is, blah blah blah. But as a player, I can feel myself getting better. And you bring up like reactive gameplay or adaptive difficulty, and that's a weird one because I think I like adaptive difficulty for the most part. I don't know if it should apply by default, right? I like to think of Max Payne 1. So Max Payne 1's adaptive difficulty was really weird where as far as I remember, if you quick load before you've actually died, the game doesn't count as you being dead. So it gets harder and harder and harder to the point where you can bullet dodge around a corner and just be instantly headshot in like a nanosecond. Now, obviously, that is hugely overtuned. It shouldn't be that bad. But it brings me back to the question of like, what am I supposed to feel here? Should I be powerful? Should I be struggling? Right? And granted, an adaptive difficulty can't fit into that mold, but I have the same question of like Doom. Let's say lore-wise, Doom guy is either struggling to stay alive and just about breaking through everything, and that's shown to us through gameplay and through difficulty, or he's an unstoppable force that shrugs off like rockets and stuff. So my question is always like, what do the developers want me to feel? What is the intention here? And I think, circling that back to AI, I kind of double down on that concern with AI getting into the mix and sort of making its own decisions of intent, right? And that's also where a lot of my concern for like AI generated art and AI writing
Yeah,
comes in.
I'd
Is
see
the
it as kind of
intent
developer
becomes
driven though,
very
that the
questionable.
developers, designers should still have an ability to fine tune and control it, that
Yes.
they leverage the power of it to add a flavor to the game or a bit of richness, but not necessarily break outside of their mold. I think it should still be something that's controlled and crafted as an experience, but that might make the experience a lot more reactive and interesting.
Yes.
To like imagine something like an RPG like The Witcher, Mass Effect, or something else, where instead of doing all these side quests in limited ways that a designer, a narrative designer, or someone has laid out for you, all these kind of extra ancillary quests could be quite interesting if it was a bit more open to how you deal with them, how the world reacts to you, how things happen. It'll make it a much richer experience if there's something a bit more loose in there, more kind of emergent. Could be quite interesting. But the problem is, though, no game is doing this, because when it comes to AAA, big budgets, and getting stuff out, everyone wants to be able to control everything to just get it done on time for production, everything else. Like, no one's taking chances to see where this tech could lead. And that's why I think it's interesting that we need to look at it in a holistic sense of what it could bring to the table, and not just worry about the art side, which we can dig into in a second, Christoph, if you want to be more on point for the art
Absolutely.
side of it.
Yeah.
But for me, my 2 cents on the art side is it ain't going anywhere. Morally reasons, it's wrong by default, just the way it's trained. But if it can help and aid in some way for art to be done and to get stuff produced and take some of the laborious work out. Like we see, obviously Nanite has helped remove LODs as it is. I mean, that's a good example, right? Nanite is a procedural kind of system which removes the need to do LODs. No one's complaining
Yeah.
about that. That's taking control from you. Not one person's
I
complaining
mean,
to you
I
on that
am
one.
complaining about that one because sometimes it logs
Yeah.
in ways I don't want, and I want
Yeah,
fine
maybe.
control. But that's like such specific edge cases,
Yeah.
right?
But exactly though,
Hmm.
like, no one
Like, give
complains
me a
about these
button
kind of
and
things.
then we're
And
good.
AI could be that for art in
Yeah,
some
no one
ways.
complains about auto packing UVs, for example.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
exactly. So if AI
That's
did
kind
my
of AI.
yeah,
Hmm.
if it done my AIs, my LODs and stuff, or no, my UVs and my LODs, then that's fine. I'm all in for that kind of procedural help, or even I think it's Promethean AI with the set dressing stuff. I've seen demos of it, never used it. I like the idea of it, that if you build a level, they can do like a first pass based on certain logic and rules, and that's no different
Hmm.
than game engines
Mm-hmm.
that have procedural population systems already. The only difference is one is going to be a AI machine learning thing. The
Mm-hmm.
other was the same kind of logic, but it was defined by a programmer. What's the difference, really?
I think
I'm all
to
for
the
it if
I
it
want to
can
say
work.
to the end consumer, there's no difference,
No
right?
one cares. No one
Like it
cares.
doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
No.
And the
No.
same is true right now, though, right? Like it doesn't really matter how the sausage is made. All that matters is the end result. And we say this often in art as well.
yeah.
It's like I
But
don't
if I
care
can
if you
spend more
sculpted it
time,
or hand did this or whatever. As long as the end result looks good, I don't really care how you got there.
exactly. And for crafting a game experience, if you can spend more time optimizing that it runs beautifully at 60 plus, if you can spend
Yeah.
more time
Yeah.
adding richness and beautiful visuals to the world, and less time optimizing and or fixing edge cases or performance issues because
Yeah.
AI can do it, that is a good
Yeah.
use of AI for game
Yeah.
dev. So I'm all in for that basically. And
Let's take Nanite for example. If you don't need to spend time making LODs and making the low poly, you can spend more time texturing the asset.
exactly.
Right? Yeah. You. Why should you? Yeah. No.
Yeah. I think it also, as long as you're careful with these things, because I think we sometimes see issues like I see a lot of issues with HLODs in games where they're just transitioning weirdly, and a lot of cases I
Mm-hmm.
think like if you had just done this manually, it would look way better, probably run better as well because you have direct control over what you're doing, but time doesn't necessarily permit that stuff, right? So improving that
Mm-hmm.
technology fixes that problem anyway. And that is kind of the only issue we see right now where sometimes I think like, oh, this might have been slightly nicer if you did it manually, but I'm sure that concern will go away in a couple of years.
Yeah, I know in your topics as well was like the discussion around AI replacing artists. Again, it depends, multifaceted thing, because if the industry doesn't have enough artists in the first place and this is used to bolster efforts, are you replacing someone if there's no one there to do it anyway in the first place? The answer to that will be a lot of people crying at the podcast now and screaming, saying, "But I've had no job for 6 months, or I can't break into the industry." I
Yeah.
refer everyone back to my earlier comment. I do think the industry needs more graduates and associates in, and we should be doing more about that.
Big time.
But the AI itself, I think, can help facilitate and might take away some of the more mundane stuff, as we discussed, like LODs or integrating assets or stuff that's a lot more kind of easy to automate. And the game dev, since I've been in it, used to be a lot more, you do everything yourself in Photoshop or an engine in Maya or Max. In my 17 years, more and more and more and more the process has been automated with substance painters, substance designers,
Oh
nanite.
yeah. Yeah.
All these things have been happening year on year. I'm as busy now than we've ever been. The teams are as busy now as they've ever
Mm-hmm.
been. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think it's going to replace much, because I still think the best experience, and this goes back to the whole original topic we started on in terms of art direction and creativity. AI is never going to beat that. AI can't create something new. We know this.
Yeah.
Based on logic, because it's always working off existing data sets. So you still need creatives to be putting their creative energies into making something special and new. And if someone's doing a brand new art style, you can't use AI because it doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's very
You
true.
need to be able to train AI, and this is where we answer our own problem from earlier: is how do you train an outsourced team of 200 people
Yeah.
to hit an art style? AI might be able to help, or you do it procedurally, you're semi AI procedurally, and that could be a way where people could make stuff to a certain level, and then the AI will come in and just do a sweep and make it all consistent.
Yeah. And
Which
if you're concerned,
I still think we're decades away from
oh,
that. But
sure, but also if you're
generally
concerned,
speaking, it's a thing.
yeah, if your concern is an ethical one as well, then for a sequel, you would have the data set being the original game to feed into that AI to help with that generation to make a bigger game
Yeah, if
on the
people are
second one
feeding an
anyway,
AI
right?
with their own data set,
Yeah,
I'm all in. Like,
you
that's fair.
avoid
That's
the
fair game.
moral implications of that. I do wonder if you think it would reduce. So I don't think it's going to replace artists, but I do wonder if it'll reduce the total number, right? And by that I mean just less people coming in, because a lot of that stuff we use AI for now, or stuff we wouldn't call AI, just like generative, whatever, that we use AI for now used to be junior work. I mean, I got my first job making Collision,
True.
right? And I don't know how common that is anymore,
Oof. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know? And I don't know if that'll reduce the amount of graduates that can get in, because it is a problem. We need more graduates. And I
Because all the
wonder.
old people like me are going to just age out and disappear. So
Well, yeah, that's a good take, Ray. But speaking of like old people, I'm sorry, Anthony, but
30 and 28, I'm offended.
the like your experience and your day-to-day job, what you saw and what you worked on, this is like not replaceable with AI. Like this is
No,
like
I don't think
undoable.
so. No.
That's yeah.
because there's very few resources, even for me, like dealing with art directors, other companies. Nowadays, most are younger than I am, so the experience is different, and that's fine. But I don't think there's enough like art directors or people. I'd even look at them like people who ship games. And if
Mm-hmm.
someone asks me
Mm-hmm.
what my role is, sometimes I don't even say art director. Like, my role is just getting the game made.
Yeah.
Sometimes I step out of art and
Yeah.
deal with another part of the game, because sometimes just getting it done and getting it shipped to a good level requires stepping into all departments and not just looking at
Mm.
it's more like game direction, then more creative direction. You're going
Yeah.
into a whole different stratosphere of problems and decisions to be made, and all that. There's not that many in the world. I think I ran the numbers. I mean, we might have actually discussed this in the previous podcast, that nowadays there's a lot of reports by different groups and bodies from all around the world discussing how many game devs are employed in the industry. I think in the UK there's a recent statistic, there's around 24,000. And again, I'm really guessing numbers here, but it's definitely mid 20s. And that's the entire UK games industry. There's 65 million people in the country,
That's
but only
nothing.
around 24,000 are actually actively employed in a developer in some way. And that includes all disciplines, all people at a studio. And when you then factor that into the US numbers and look at the European numbers, like, there's not that
Mm.
many game devs in the world at all.
No.
So when you
Yeah.
start really drilling, because I remember I ran the maths sometime during COVID because I was bored. And when I did, trying to figure out like how many art directors are there in the world in games, I was like in the hundreds, if not less. There was
Yeah,
not
makes
many
sense.
at
Yeah,
all.
it's a small amount.
And that's obviously one role. Then you look at how many great character artists are there, how many extremely efficient rendering engineers are there. There's not many, and every studio's dying for rendering engineers. So when you say we're not taking in as many as we can, I think the game teams are so big now. There's so much diversity in it that per discipline, there's plenty of room for people to join the games industry. Not everyone can be a prop artist, because obviously that's something that's easy to outsource.
Mhm.
And that's kind of shifted anyway, that most studios now in-house, you're doing level dressing, level setup, you're doing bug fixing, you're optimizing, you're getting the game done. Most
Mm.
internal teams, you'll have a small contingent who are like outsource management or leads, doing the benchmarks and taking in the props and integrating them from outsourced teams. But most, I mean, that's a UK studio thing. I don't think now, compared to when I started, there's that many that are doing all the work in house anymore. It's just not feasible
Yeah.
given the time, the quality, and the budgets. It's That's already changed. And I think that's why we're seeing less and less of these roles opening up, because most
Agreed.
people, when you graduate from university, and I presume you two did exactly this, what do you have in your portfolio? An environment diorama, a couple of props, and you're like, hey, I'm ready, hire me. But they're actually hiring people who are doing level dressing, or as you said, collision or something else.
Yeah.
So immediately when you're applying for a job that's already been outsourced years before you graduated.
Mhm.
You're not actually aware of what you're applying for. So a reason I'd say a lot of candidates are not successful is they're applying for the wrong thing in the local area.
Yes,
So
that
that's
makes a
why
huge difference. Yeah.
if you're applying for a job, do research on the company,
Mhm.
look at the credits of a game, look at their team makeup, look at how many people are actually in the like level art team, prop team, environment art team. Maybe reach out and get some insight into what the studio's needs are and tailor your portfolio to that or your application. Because if you apply for like a D3T as an example, if you applied with us today for a prop job, we're not hiring for prop jobs right now because that's usually outsourced to somewhere else. We're looking for people with more generalist or robust experience. So I think that's probably a reason why people aren't finding their feet in the industry. Obviously, there's the economic reasons, there's the fear of AI, there's cost, budget stuff going on right now. And actually, this is another thing to mention for people who don't know. The industry goes through cycles. This year has actually been as bad as 2023, but usually right now in December, we're coming up to the end of a tax year preparation for companies who have to file all that stuff by the end of March, usually, or depending on the country, maybe January. So there's a lot of project trimming, cutting,
Yes.
reducing in scope around this time of the year, always has been. January, February, they kind of finalize all these plans, and usually from March every year it starts to kick off again, and that's when
Mhm.
stuff gets busy again, and then the cycle rinses and repeats every single year, year in, year out.
Yes, I think
So the
knowing
best
when
time
to
to
apply.
yes,
Yeah.
so the best time to
Mm-hmm.
apply is always around March, because that's when studios have unlocked their budgets, they're ready to dive in, they know what they need, and they're ready
They
to
need
roll.
people.
You can
So you need to have
sometimes,
the right folio at the right time for the
yes.
right company.
Because yeah, that's also often when companies, especially studios that don't outsource a lot, that's when they'll ramp up internally, hire a bunch of juniors for short-term contracts to polish and do the gritty work like collision or making LODs manually. Um, they'll contract those people for like 3 to 6 months and then get rid of them again. And that is a really good way to get your foot in the door. And that's how I got my foot in the door. And then, you have experience at a studio, you can kind of build from there. But I think circling back a bit to the topic of like AI assisted tooling, I also wonder, I think it makes it a bit harder to assess skills that people have. I think it makes hiring more difficult. Here's a weird example, right? I can go also automatically pack a UV right now, and it'll be fine. It's less interesting to look at. And if I were to manually pack a UV right now, you could look at it and you could see the decisions I've made, and you could probably make some assumptions based purely on that UV map alone. You could make at least some assumptions of skill level, ability, what I was thinking about, blah blah blah. You can't really do that when you automatically pack things, right? Do I think that's like hyper important? Not really. It's kind of a microcosm. But it does make things a lot more interesting, right? Especially when you see people applying. I have people DM me every now and then asking for help with their portfolio or this or that. And I tell every single environment artist the exact same thing. Show me a trim, show me a tileable, show me like a tiny diorama. That's it. If you can make a trim, then clearly you know how to UV things that have specific needs. You know how to reuse stuff. So that's solid, right? You show me a tileable, you're going to have to make tileables anyway. So at least a bad one shows me that you know what and why you're making that, and a small environment shows me that you can put it all together. And honestly, the amount of portfolios I see that don't have those kind of fundamentals is crazy. Like a lot of people are producing good artwork, and that's great, but it's also the how sometimes. You need to show that you can work within a studio and with people and within pipelines. And as much as I love seeing, for example, scenes that are put together in like a month and you use a ton of mega scans and you grab this off the marketplace, that shows a very particular skill set. That shows you know how to reuse stuff, and that's great. But I don't know that you're able to kind of do a lot of the gritty work, right? Because there is still need to manually pack UVs sometimes. These tools aren't perfect. So I need to know that you're able to do that. Because the last thing I want, and I've had this before in the middle of a production, is you're actually showing someone how to properly UV something. And that should never happen, right? It's a huge waste of everyone's time. So I think it's really difficult, and it becomes more difficult to show those skills off as well in a portfolio. It's why I've never done this. Maybe I'm just bad, but I love seeing wireframes on people's portfolios. I love it. I love seeing that people know how to correctly optimize an asset. And yeah, Nanite exists now, and I wonder if we'll get to the point where we look at that geometry and we're like, yeah, that's great. But also, that's not good for nanites rendering. I wonder if it'll shift to that from like, oh, nice topology, to like, hey, that's not going to render well, or that's not going to cull correctly, or whatever.
Well, don't
Hmm.
forget that still many studios do
Yes.
not use Unreal 5.
Mhm.
As much as I like Unreal 5 and a contingent and portion of our projects do use UE5, we also have as many who are not using UE5 at all, using proprietary engines. So that knowledge as well is that's why if someone's finishing a game art course now and they're learning only how to build for Nanite,
Yeah.
you're again limiting
Hmm.
yourself with all the knowledge Ray just mentioned, because that then if you're working on mobile, if you're working for VR, XR, all that still matters. AR, you need to know how to optimize and be super optimal. So all that is super important to show. Like if you're especially more so if you're getting hired for those kind of studios, you have less wiggle room in being inefficient
Yeah.
to get things out because you have to hit like 120 FPS or 90. It's
Yeah.
a whole different ball game than hitting 30 or 60.
On that point, actually, you also can't guarantee software at a studio,
No,
right?
you
Like,
can't.
I know how
Also,
to use Marvelous Designer. I don't have a license currently, nor do I need one with what I'm doing at the moment. But it's very likely you might learn how to use Marvelous to make like tents or something, and then get brought onto a project and be like, "Hey, sick tents on your portfolio. Can you make more?" No, we don't have a Marvelous license, and no, you can't have one. Then you're screwed. So also learning how to do things the hard way can save you in the long run.
So let's do a quick little like thought experiment. Let's say you are a prop artist in 2030. What has changed? Like from now, it's hard to tell what the future will bring, especially with AI. But what has dramatically changed in your workflow? Maybe looking back 6 years. To maybe we can have a conversation going here.
More RGB lights. Yeah, that's an interesting one, right? Because I think you say 6 years ago, and I even like Substance
It's crazy.
was,
2018.
yeah, like Substance was becoming common, but it still wasn't exactly widespread. Not like every
Hmm.
studio was even using Substance Painter. Like some studios were still using Photoshop, or just started learning how to use Designer.
right, what I'll
It's
do is I'll add some context here for you. I'll
mm,
go with the old man knowledge here. So when I first started in the industry, it was the PS3. It was prior to PBR. Painter didn't exist.
yep.
Designer didn't exist. You had Maxify. That was it. So my first experience was you would do
Did you
your
bake?
no,
Yeah.
baking wasn't even a
No.
thing. Nope, nope. When I first
Oh, okay.
started, it was everything was in Photoshop. You had to be bloody good at UVs. You had to know all about triangle order, winding order. You had to be able to model in certain ways. That was good for the PS3. You had to do all your texturing and even just the UVs and matching a UV and UV space with the right other one elsewhere on the mesh had to be kind of done by hand, and you had to kind of find the UV coordinates and make sure that that pixel text will match that one over there. Where now in
That's
Painter,
crazy.
it's all just applied by the materials, right? So, but before I go forward from my experience when I started to
Hmm.
how it was with Painter and all that came in, I'm going to go back a little bit for all the artists who I met, who worked in the PlayStation 1 days and before that, but they
Ooh.
actually used to have to plot a model's coordinates in 3D space. So think of XYZ. They had to actually type in the XYZ values of each vertex mapped out on Graph Painter to build a model. So they had to type in by hand then. So they didn't have the ability to even move a vert in space like
Now
we do
that's a
with a
tech
gizmo.
artist.
No way.
No, yes, yes, way. So this is where they showed me and explained to me how stuff was made back then. So if you look at what their experience was, then we'd say 15, 20 years later, I had my experience where you could actually move verts in 3D space. And I was like, oh, that was a revelation for them. That was basic for me. And as I mentioned, all my initial work would have been Photoshop and modeling. That was it. There was nothing, there was no other maps. You just had a diffuse map. That was it. There was no normal maps, no spec gloss maps, no roughness maps, metallic maps. None of that existed. Curvature maps and all the rest of it, all that was non existent. So from there, using just a tool set of Photoshop and modeling, we then progressed to the PS4 days, which meant bringing in PBR for the first time. Designer came online around then. Painter came online around then. That sped up the processes. It took the labor out of having to do all this painful work either on graph paper for the people way back when, having to deal with what I dealt with,
Yeah.
having to eyeball everything with Photoshop, and you draw a pixel and you'd save it and then you'd load it up in Engine or Maya and go, oh, I missed it by a pixel. Damn, you'd go back and count again and move it again. So all that was a pain in the butt. So the first time I used Painter was mind blowing because all of a sudden I could just paint across a mesh and it automatically sorted out all the UV space shenanigans to make sure that everything matched all your different shells, especially if you had a shell at multiple points that they all shared the same vert in UV. You ended up having to make sure that every point of that had the right texel, color, and value. So all of that was removed from the process. So that's how tools improved from those two times. But then where this gets interesting, so that would have been around 2010 when we had all like the painter heading towards PS4, and actually not even. For me, it would have been 2012 was when that happened. So I would have already been working on a few games from 07 till 12 to then move at that time into what became Drive Club, PS4, PBR, Painter,
Hmm.
Designer. That all kicked off around that time for me. So that all became better, quicker, but we took longer on assets. And this is the staple of where we're going in this conversation is assets have always taken longer to build. The more fidelity you put in, the more technical requirements exist with PBRs and different maps and deferred rendering, and all of these things add complexity and time. But since that 2012, we'd say, moment, and now we're 12 years later in 2024, we're still using Painter. We're still using Designer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We're still
Hmm.
using Bakes and everything else. So I'm actually going to have the opinion I've not seen much, if any, innovation in workflows and pipelines since 2012. For me, it's been pretty steady during those. And
Hmm.
that could be a good or a bad thing. That, and there's probably stuff out there I'm unaware of that people please link us in the comments would be good if there's something super cool. But I think obviously Epic's pushing the substrate. They're pushing layered materials that are cheaper. They're throwing out other types of workflows. So that might be different. So basically, doing Painter real time. Maybe that's where we're going, where you're going to need less texture data and it's all going to be hidden in materials and it's all going to be dealt with at runtime. That would save us even more time, right? Because then you're going to go straight from modeling to texturing and doing all the work in engine. That is
Yeah.
the fastest you
You
can
know,
go from A to B.
I remember
Yeah.
reading a comment when Nanite was first being shown off a couple of years ago. Epic showed off the that demo in the desert, and they showed off like
Oh
all
yeah,
those
yeah.
statues. I remember
Popular
reading
one.
some of the comments of people that are like, "Oh, I wonder if I can just poly paint the
Yeah,
vertices in
straight
ZBrush
from
and
ZBrush.
just
But you
take that
can.
straight into the engine." And you can, and like
You can.
I,
Yeah.
it feels ridiculous to say, and this is going to age horribly, but I do wonder if that'll become a thing where we just like we're actually just kind of vertex, like we've gone back to vertex painting assets, right? Like the way we did it in the 90s. I mean, we've gone back to like painted vertices to represent something, but they
Yeah.
also hold like roughness values and stuff. That would be a
But yeah,
horrible workflow for these
that is doable now though. That
massive
you
file
could
sizes.
different
Um,
UV sets, different channels. You could absolutely do that
yeah.
now,
You
100%.
bring up an interesting point though, yeah, because when I was first learning game art, it was like 2012, 2013, and I started learning like how to do stuff in Photoshop, and then stumbled across like the Quixel suite, like Ddo and Endo and
Oh
all that.
yeah,
Oh yeah, that was
oh yeah.
crazy, right? Like that was mind blowing. And then Substance a couple of years later, I was insane, painting like on a mesh across a UV island, unheard of. Um, I'm just gonna throw a prediction out there. I'm a 2030 artist. This is my badly aged prediction. No more poly modeling. I think we're gonna move to like what are they called? Like SDFs. You guys seen SDF modeling where people are like
Hmm.
smushing stuff? I
It's
honestly
like
like I don't know why we wouldn't go in that direction because I spend so much time merging
it's a Blender
verts,
tool,
right?
right?
And I think it is. I think
Conjure
that one is
SDF.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, but like the meta shapes and ZBrush do the same thing, right? Or people are just like
Hmm.
dynameshing. Like I think if those tools become easier to use, they'll just become very common. Where like you're no longer polymodeling stuff, you're just kind of
Yeah, UVs are
putting
still a
shapes
thing
together.
then.
Yes,
Mm.
Well, I
but
Mm.
mean, we have triplanar and everything else. I think
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
UVs are only a thing because at runtime now with the current consoles, we need to balance the books a little bit. We can't quite get everything we want. We do have triplanar materials and similar already in action on
Mhm.
certain games in limited capacities. There's going to be a moment when the GPUs are fast enough and have enough memory that they'll deal with this at runtime, which is why I mentioned where I think it's going is Painter at runtime would be a very likely possibility where we do exactly what you said, Ray. Use like the SDF modeling or other to get the model done as quickly as possible, get it into the engine. The engine will then, at runtime, derive curvatures and AOs and all
Yep.
different maps that you need. You just choose whether you want it or not. It'll all
Mhm.
be held in the data of the model,
Yeah.
whether it's by vertex or other, and then that'll be it. It'll just do it all at runtime.
Yeah, your layered material will be done in engine where you put a tileable on
So yes,
a
so be
certain ideal
no
surface and
baking,
then
no messing
generate your
around, no having to
scratches, all
export
that.
textures, no integrations. Like that is the fastest you'll be able to get a prop from A to B.
Mm.
And maybe that's it. Maybe that is where we go. Who knows? But it'll always be to shorten that path, basically. The journey from starting to create the content, no matter how you do it, to engine it'll be narrowing that more and more and more until the point it almost becomes seamless. And actually, you know what? To be fair, now I've seen Epic invest in modeling tools in Engine. You have baking tools in Engine. What are the chances we're all just going to do it all in Engine at a
I
certain
mean,
point? It'll all
if
just be done
you
there.
if either of you have had a chance to use the Source 2 tools, they are phenomenal. Like, they are the best level editing tools I've ever used. They're genuinely incredible, and you can essentially edit your static meshes in Engine, like in real time. It's wonderful. You know, you want a new trim on your building, you just make the new trim in Engine. You don't need to go back and forth between Engine and you know, it's why I'm a bit jealous whenever I see workflows that like Naughty Dog have, for example, where they're like Maya is also their editor, so they're building
Oh
stuff
yeah,
in Maya, and then
it's
that's
crazy.
like that. It is in game, and I kind of love that.
Mm.
I think we spend a lot of time getting stuff from software to software to software, right? And I
Yeah,
think
pros and
reducing that
cons that
pipeline,
I did
yeah,
that at Evolution or
mm,
in-house tools was basically do it all in Maya, and the level was constructed in Maya, but we still had to export from a prop scene to a reference scene, which was then referenced in editor, much like dropping assets around.
see, yeah,
So it was still kind of similar, but it was all kept in Maya, but you could never see what you were doing, and then adjusting lighting and everything else all had to be done engine side or through um, different command windows and stuff. So it wasn't as quick, and what you see is what you get as
yeah.
Unreal. So what do you think, Christoph, your side? Do you have anything in your mind that you think 2030 would hold?
Well, for me, like Nanite has been a big thing in my workflow because we are reliant on that. So what I mostly do weapons, so I don't need to do low polys anymore. I just texture the high poly,
Mhm.
which is kind of cool.
Boom.
But
Yeah.
it also has it has some downsides, but it also has huge upsides because no building low poly, just doing a quick self bake, and then you have more time to texture and just focus on like on the textures and cranking that out. So yeah, I I think mostly where the trend will go is that AI will be a thing and AI will help us. We mostly are still using AI, like as you already said, like doing UVs and having
Yeah.
a
Or at least
UV layout.
procedural. I don't know if people
Like
would
all the
class that as
procedural
AI,
is
but
basically AI, right?
kind of in a way.
Yeah, it's something some logic in the back end working in Maya or and doing UV layouts. So yeah, 2030 is not that far away, and I think it will be happening faster than we can imagine.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
me, I'd say just for folks listening, it's like keep an open mind, always be willing to learn new stuff because that's just how it goes
yes,
with the
it's
industry.
huge.
And then always focus on your core creative skill sets. Don't get bogged down by tools. Don't only become good at certain tools. Be a good
Mhm.
artist, have a good eye, improve your observational skills, look at different things like cinematography, study art, fine art,
Yes, yeah,
illustration, imagery, visual language. There's a whole pile of things you can do to better bolster your skills. So no matter what tool someone gives you, you are still a
You're a
great
good
artist
artist.
at the core. So
Mm.
yeah,
I'd say put your
absolutely.
focus. And I would like to try and think that I've been spending my career trying to be a good artist, but Ray or anyone can disagree. But that's where I think the value will be for everyone. That if we all do that, that's the one thing that AI can't do. It
Yeah,
can't be an effective, good, creative, on point artist making good creative decisions. And then no matter what tool they throw at people, we'll just do the best we can with it to make a good game and good art. And that's the ultimate goal, really.
yeah. Fundamentals, I think, are oh, yeah, there we are. Fundamentals, I think, are they're not going to change, right? Those artistic fundamentals have existed for centuries. Learn at
Mm.
basic color theory, know why certain colors go together, or at least have a baseline understanding. I couldn't recite color theory, I couldn't teach it, but when I'm picking colors, there is at least something in the back of your head that can inform those decisions, right? It's the same with composition, like at a bare minimum, know like the rule of thirds. It'll help you line things up slightly nicer. There's a reason, you know, 'cause I had this when I was learning. I would post for critiques and I would post one image and another image of the same thing at different angles, and people would like one more. And I was like, but why is that one better? I think it looks better, but I couldn't tell you why. And then you learn a little bit about cinematography, you learn some of these rules, and you start to understand why it looks better, and you can replicate that more, right? Those fundamentals are not going to change. I think that's
So,
a huge one.
so what is the best way, like maybe for you, Anthony, what was the best way for you to learn those fundamentals and to like soak it up like a sponge and Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and
I'm a weird
find
one
us out.
because I started off wanting to be an illustrator or comic
Oh
artist
yeah,
who
comic
studied,
illustrator, right?
yeah, because I studied classic animation. So I was already in 2D
Mm.
camp before I even touched the 3D. The only reason I ended up in games is my course changed halfway through and they added this 3D element. And I was like, oh, this is exciting. I like tech. Um, but for me, what I have been doing actually is I could probably share a list of cool resources on the YouTube comments when this comes out is I've just been spent the last few years buying up any book or resource like the 3D Total have a cool series on composition and narrative. Framed Ink have visual language ones. So I mean, if you want, if it's allowed, I can drop a whole pile of links on.
Oh,
I can
absolutely.
send them to you to share
Um,
to people on this video. But basically, I have a massive resource of books that I've read over the years or things that I think are worthwhile topics for people to dig into.
Mhm.
But again, it's go outside of games, as Ray said. It's existed for hundreds of years. You can get loads of art books right now dealing with composition. There's actually more than you can actually read. So it's not like you're short of knowledge. It's just knowing the best ones to go to get the core fundamentals you need to be effective.
Yeah,
And this is why I think being a game artist, like there's so much to it. There's the visual side, but when you mentioned color earlier, Ray, there's the functional side as well. Because if you're in a video game, if you do a yellow ladder or a red barrel, you know what you're getting into.
yeah,
And there's certain
exactly.
conventions you need
mm,
to be careful of as well. So there's not just a knowledge of color theory from an emotional response or in terms of receding in an image or balancing a composition of an image. In games, there's also the functional aspect of color. What is the color saying to you through the narrative? What is it implying
yeah.
to you from the game designer? What does it say in terms of function? So I think it's a massive other element that you can't read anywhere because that doesn't exist when it comes to games as well. I think the red barrels is the easiest one to discuss, or the yellow climbing apparatus, that they've become staples now only because it's
Hmm.
an accepted
Yeah, and
thing.
it's
And
also knowing that like yellow catches the eye. It's the color of caution. It's there to
exactly,
alarm us,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that you might be able to joke to yourself like, oh, I have to go that way because the doorway is red, or I have to
Mm.
climb that because the cliff is yellow, or whatever, right? But that's kind of a human
Something.
fundamental thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I know a
Something's
frog is
really
poisonous because the way it
obvious.
looks.
Something really obvious is the light
Mm,
in
yes,
level design when you don't know where to go. It's like super dark, and you have like a fallen over light or something that is like glimming
yeah.
and
And that's the
shaking.
natural human instinct, right? That if we were
Exactly.
out in the west
One
and
is
it's pitch black and you see a
safety.
campfire,
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna go to the campfire. So it's like a
yeah.
natural instinct for humans to go to the light. So
The
that's
flight
all.
response. Mm.
Exactly, and that's all used in games effectively, which is why we go back to that's you as a creative, as an artist, knowing what tools you have at your disposal
Yeah,
to affect an image, to get a response, either to direct someone to a place, to impart emotional beats or something. Like I think it's super powerful, which is why I've been nerding out on this stuff for years behind the scenes through illustration, comics, other things as a hobby kind of on the side. But now I've realized more and more it impacts games so much
yeah,
in everything we
massively.
do,
Mm.
that we're making these 3D spaces that people, and this is where we go back to Arkham Knight Asylum thing, is when it's all done well, an experience never truly ages and it's always brilliant. And it's because of all these great decisions. It's when a game doesn't really think about these things and it is all kind of like ambiently lit and it's very noisy and there's too much going on and it's not very clear. That's when it's kind of all falling apart. So when I refer to art direction in a game, it's the coming together of all these visual elements that are balanced well to be hitting all these notes extremely well for the player to give them a good experience. And it's not just
Mm.
noise, 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 color, color, color. That's when art direction fails to me. That's when it doesn't work.
It's the right balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I will say on the topic of fundamentals, one other thing I'd really recommend, at least for environment artists, is learn how to draw, at least badly. Obviously, if you're focusing on your portfolio, trying to get your first job in the door, focus on doing 3D. But one of my biggest regrets is not learning how to draw and not being able to draw sooner. And it's something I'm still learning and working on because you might not need it now, but when you're in the position where you need to get ideas across, being able to at least scribble some,
Oh yeah,
show what
yeah.
you're talking about and get that idea across can help because not everyone can visualize things in their heads. Like my fiance can't imagine things, right? Like some people quite literally cannot form a mental image of stuff. So being able to at least draw badly or speed model if you're that fast, I wish I was, but being able to at least draw something quickly, sketch on a piece of paper in a couple of minutes can help you explain stuff to people. So I've had this all the time, even in the office. There's a whiteboard around. I'm talking to someone. I'm like, oh, just do this. And we can go over to the whiteboard. We can scribble it down quick. And it's helpful, right? And if I was at the drawing level I was 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do that. So I think it's a very valuable skill. Just at least be able to draw badly.
Yeah, I think that helps your observational skills as well, especially as a modeler, that people seem
Hmm.
to forget relative proportion. That if you give someone something to model outside of context and you don't give them dimensions and metrics, they tend to struggle. Where actually it's your job then to go figure out what is the size of this asset in the real world, how does it fit against other assets in the world, and you need to then make decisions around how to get the look of the asset correct with relative proportion just by observing and doing it. Sometimes drawing can help deconstruct, even as Ray said, bad drawing, just to figure out all the components that go together to break down a complex asset like guns and things
Yeah.
are quite complicated. That sometimes having even crude skills to be able to just do yourself a little mind map of, okay, this is this bit, and to deconstruct it quickly on paper makes you a better modeler, makes you a better artist. And I
True.
found those
Yeah.
skills super useful for
Yeah.
me over the years. I think we hit most of the topics on your list. I think we did
I
quite well there.
Yeah, we did really, really well, Anthony, and Ray.
I was
I would
yeah.
like close it up now, and I think we really gave a good insight of what happened last year, of what will happen in the next few years, and how things have changed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to leave it on a more positive note because yes, the last couple of years has been brutal. When I joined the industry, there was massive layoffs around 2008 as well. So the industry
Hmm.
does go through these cycles. So
Yeah.
for most people who are concerned about getting into the industry, don't. I mean, for me, it's like don't let that big narrative and tone of this year affect your aspirations because you're going into a career. A career is a journey. You don't necessarily all do it at the same time. If people have to take a pause right now, go get a part-time job and spend time working on their portfolio, that is the best thing you can do in this situation because inevitably, this is a
Mm.
multi-billion dollar industry with lots going on. It will come back. Stuff is going to improve. Companies will rehire. There are going to be new companies forming. There's going to be movement. So your opportunity will be there. It's up to you then to be ready with the right portfolio, showing your capabilities to take advantage of that opportunity. So people listening now, if they are concerned about these things, it's a moment in time. This isn't the industry forever.
Yeah.
And yes, it is
Yeah.
rubbish. And like Ray, I have friends who've lost jobs, and I've lost jobs in the past and been made redundant. And I know it's
Oh yeah.
horrible. But at the same time, it's a journey, right? None of it's always going to be like this
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
So, and the industry does need to get better, as we discussed briefly, more sustainable. It needs to be a lot more self-critical. We need to invest more in the future talent. All of this should happen. And I do hear whisperings from different clients and companies that are all really starting to think like this. So I'm seeing hope from
That's
the
good.
inside of
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing
Absolutely.
little seeds growing in and around keywords, in and around other studios
Mhm.
of being very aware of this issue. And there's good conversations happening to help improve these things over the next few years. So basically where I'm at is I'm quite hopeful. I still love the industry. It as a medium, it's fantastic. There's a lot to play for, pun intended, in the future of games. I just want the games industry to focus more on being super creative, new experiences, new mechanics, new art styles, and stop getting bogged down on this chase to get ultra realism. Because in the end, no one
Yeah.
cares. And I think that's where we
Yeah.
started off. And
Yeah.
just to round it off with that is I want to see more
Just want to
creative
have fun.
things. And
Mm.
if Helldivers, Arcane, and other examples from this year don't prove it to them, I don't know what will. Because that's what the audience is obviously wants. And I want to
Well
see
put.
the industry go back to creatives making cool experiences by not necessarily auteurs, but by people who really want to get something out there, almost
Mhm.
like indie. I want to see more of that and less of super crazy big budget battle royale chasers because that doesn't help anyone long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah.
That's
Best
my
comment.
close out. So yes, I'll pass it over to Ray then.
I guess my closer is, yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. Things are actually looking better. It might not always seem like it. Be happier on social media because people are going to see that stuff when you're negative and a doomer all the time. There is a positive way to be negative. You know, I'm a complainer, but there's a way to complain joyfully or with a smile on your face. So there's a way to be really upset about it. So yeah, I think things are looking up. Things are getting better. You know, I don't know if people remember the whole like survive 24 thing, but we're pretty much there, and it is actually looking up. You know, like Anthony said, as the financial year ramps up again next year, we should see more roles opening up. Hopefully, more people getting in. I think we're in a good place, honestly. I think games are only getting better. We're starting to see really unique stuff in the AAA space. I mean, Indiana Jones is a great example of this. I have not seen a AAA game like that in a very long time. A game
Nice.
willing to
Yeah.
take its markers away and let players explore and do puzzles.
Mm.
Um, you know, I can't remember the last time a AAA game had honest to God puzzles without telling the player how to do them. So I think things are looking good for consumers. We're in a great place. Things are looking good for players. We're in a great place. Um, yeah, I mean,
In
just
terms of
keep
style
working
and
on it.
stuff, I wanted to shout out like Compulsion Games doing South of Midnight, the kind of almost stop motion-esque visuals. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculously awesome, right? And it's more swings like that I want to see happen
Yeah.
because that just looks cool as a prospect and a project. And I think just get
Yeah.
more creative again. Let's get out there and use this
The
tech
thing
to do
is,
great things.
yeah, the thing is, with creativity, you need to risk something, and you need to
Exactly.
Yes,
make
yeah, take
Yeah,
risks.
mistakes.
That's the key
And
one.
exactly.
Yeah,
This is why you don't start. I've been in meetings where companies are like, "Oh, we're going to begin this big $500 million project." Like, why? Why not just begin a $20 million one that's cool and risky, and take a small risk and see if the market wants it, rather than going
maybe you hit,
all
yeah,
into hundreds of
yeah.
millions? And that's my problem. It's like, stop aiming for this. And I'm not going to pull out particular publisher, but the amount of times we've all seen the message, right, when it comes up on the company's account with the Twitter post and the image, you
Mm.
know what
yellow
wording you're going to
background.
get.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know
The
what
yellow
wording
background.
you know what wording you're going to get. It didn't meet expectations. But if your
Mm-hmm.
expectations were delusional and it made no sense to begin with, of course you didn't meet them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's not anyone's fault. If I expect to make $1 billion from a game that I do, and it comes out and it sells like 100 million, that's my fault for looking for $1 billion.
Yep.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
you
Exactly.
gotta think properly here. And I think for me, a lot of the issue is a disconnect between publishers and execs, the actual developers. And I think more trust has to be given back to the developers to chase stuff like South of Midnight, to chase games that have something to them, or a voice, or an opinion, or a style, or something a bit more depth, rather than just cookie cutter. Let's be the next battle royale. Let's be the next team extraction shooter or whatever.
Yep.
It's like, that's all fine as well. I'm okay with gamers that like that stuff. Some of these games are fun. But if you're just chasing a trend to try and make cash, you're already starting from a bad position. You should be
Mm.
making stuff you believe in as a
That
publisher and a
Yeah.
applies
company.
to individuals as well, like
Yep.
artists. If you're still working your portfolio, don't just copy stuff you've seen other people make. Try to make something new. You know,
Yeah.
I was working on a Half-Life 2 piece for like almost a full year, and then the big Half-Life 2 RTX announcement happened, and I was like, you know what I'm doing is probably as interesting, but I could do something cooler since someone else is already doing it. I scrapped it, and granted, I'm in the position to be able to do that, but I scrapped it and I'm doing something else that's way cooler, way more interesting, right? So that applies to individuals as well. Be willing to
Yeah.
take risks. I mean, I got my first job because I took a huge pay cut and I took an incredibly stupid risk, and it paid off, right? And sometimes you have to take that. I've spoken to people desperate for jobs, and I'll say, okay, apply to a job in another country, and they're like, no, don't want to do that. I don't want to move. And sometimes you have to be
Mm.
willing to do that kind of stuff.
And what about
Yeah.
you, Christoph? What are you closing out on
Yeah.
for 2024?
Yeah, for me, it's also, I've been working a lot this year, but it was pretty cool because I was just working on one project because I stopped freelancing and now I'm working full time on one project now. So this year was really, really cool. I learned so much stuff being like in production, like in full production with one studio, not just being on the on the back end doing props.
It is very different, isn't it, as an experience?
Mm-hmm. There are so many other things like you can see, or you see when you're doing games not from an outside perspective, like when you're doing them in house, because um, there is so much more to just making a game apart from doing props. But you can get lost in the process when you are just focusing on your craft. So yeah, I'm super happy at the moment how things are for me. I'm super happy I have a job. That's something I need to remind myself all the time
Yes.
when
It's
seeing layoffs. I'm always like super yeah, humble and like happy to have a job at this amazing company.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm grateful for that every day. So I second that.
oh yeah.
And you're
exactly.
about 1 year there now, no? You're coming up on your 1 year
Yeah, I
anniversary. Or
started in January. Yeah,
yes. So
yeah.
yeah,
Oh nice.
1 year anniversary coming in. Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Anthony,
Awesome.
Ray, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
I'm super happy we had a great, fantastic talk. I wish you a wonderful Christmas time, and in German you would say a good slip into the new year.
Nice.
You you slide into the
Yeah,
new
slide
year.
into the new year and break a leg. Maybe two. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much, and
I was
take
gonna say
care.
we should probably also add in everything we said as personal opinions and not
Yeah, don't fire
Oh
in
me.
any
yeah,
way attached to
absolutely.
any of our companies
Thanks.
whatsoever, just to cover ourselves.
Don't fire
That
me.
it's all
Yeah,
just observations from the trenches. That's it.
yeah, amazing. Take
Awesome.
care.
Having
Bye
fun.
bye.
It's great talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.